it ready? Yeah, okay, there we go. All right, thanks everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. My name's Amy Burgoyne. I saw many of you back in January when we held a similar community meeting over at Cooper, so thanks again for coming out. After that meeting, there were a few of us who got together and formed a little group called the Concerned Citizens Against Gun Violence. And it's that group tonight that sort of put this meeting together. So lots of people here have been working pretty hard since then on the issue, and I know that includes a lot of you guys, so thank you. There's one person here that we all know and love, and I really have to thank, Supervisor John Faust. He's always a great help in putting these things together. And I also want to say thank you to Jennifer and her crew here at the Alden Theater for taking good care of us tonight. We want to start, before we get to our great speakers, we thought we'd start with just a couple of words from some local citizens here in our area who are working on this issue, and we're going to bring them up and have them tell you just a little bit about why they're here.
Thank you, Amy. Good evening. My name is Jim Lynch. I would describe my political philosophy as conservative, independent, libertarian, and opposed to unnecessary government regulations. However, I am a strong advocate of gun safety regulations. My support for gun safety regulations rests on the belief that the right to bear arms is not an absolute right, but rather it is subordinate to the highest, most important right a citizen has, his or her right to life. A government's most sacred duty is to protect the lives of its citizens, in particular, young, innocent children. When a government subordinates the safety of its citizens to the convenience of gun merchants and gun owners, that government loses its moral claim to govern. I look forward to working together with you all to enact sensible gun safety regulations that will respect the right to life and safety of our citizens. Thank you very much.
Hi, good evening. My name is Ruth Hoffman, and I live here in McLean. The level of grief and sadness I felt after Newtown was probably not unlike what each of you in this room felt. It was heart-wrenching. And as a mother of a 4-year-old and 7-year-old little girls, it hit close to home. I could relate to how small and defenseless they were, how excited they were in anticipating the holiday season, and how eager they were to have their parents volunteer that afternoon to help make gingerbread houses. I volunteered at my first grade, my little first grader, Paige. I volunteered at her school that following Monday to make gingerbread houses in her first grade classroom. I found myself questioning my long-held beliefs on this issue. You see, I'm a Republican. I grew up in Kansas in a farming community. And after Newtown, I listened a little closer. I followed the debate, and I became ashamed of my Republican Party and their arguments and talking points against even making the most modest changes in trying to address this issue. And then I feel regret. I feel regret that I didn't care more sooner about this issue. On January 2nd, my daughter's school went into a lockdown. A man had stolen a car, wrecked it near the school, and fled on foot. And so my first grader, Paige's class, huddled in the corner of their first grade classroom for 30 minutes. And she told us that night, she said, "You know, Mommy, I cried and I prayed because the other kids said a man was coming with a gun to shoot and kill us." Now their first grade classroom keeps their individual doors locked every day, and the children take turns, and they serve in honor of opening, as a butler, to open their first grade classroom to other kids throughout the day. I'm here tonight because I have an obligation to keep my children safe and my community safe, and try to work towards some change to keep our society safe. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kathleen Murphy, and I'm running for the House of Delegates because I believe we need sensible gun safety. I am here today because my brother was murdered. He was murdered by a gunman with an illegal gun. The man was a recidivist. He had been let out of prison early because of overcrowding, and yet he had no problem getting a gun right off the street. We need to change this. I'm asking you to not give up, to not give in, and don't walk away from this issue. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Maggie Reinstein, and I became passionate about this issue 6 years ago. 6 years ago, I know you can't see, this is a very small photograph, but in the corner here is my nephew, Chad. Chad was 18 years old. He was a superb athlete. He was a great surfer. He was captain of his basketball team. He had started school at the university and was having a few problems with adjustment and some major problems with a girlfriend. This would all be a sitcom, except that there was a gun in his grandfather's house when he was in a very, very weak moment that he grabbed and shot himself dead. To this day, his cousins, my daughters, are really still rocked and shocked that this happened to their cousin, because they firmly believe that had there not been a gun so easily available in a weak moment, that Chad would still be with us today. Thanks.
Thank you all. And I know there are a lot of reasons that you all as individuals are here tonight. One of the reasons may be that you've gotten multiple emails from people, local people, the concerned citizens. One of the people that's responsible for a lot of that work is Ben Zuhl. I want to recognize Ben. He has organized people to walk the petition that many of you signed, many of you volunteered and walked. We took 3,000 signatures to Senator Warner and over 2,300 to Representative Frank Wolf. We've been to meetings, we've made phone calls, we've emailed. All of you all have done all of those things. So I'd like to recognize Ben Zuhl as And then very briefly, I'd just like to recognize a few people who are here with us tonight, and then we'll get on to our great speakers. I'd like to introduce Joe Montano. He is here. He is the Northern Virginia Regional Director for Senator Tim Kaine. Joe, please take our thanks to Senator Kaine for his unfailing support for these issues. We appreciate that. We also want to welcome Luke Albee and Nicholas Devereaux from Senator Mark Warner's office. Luke is the Chief of Staff and Nicholas is Legislative Counsel. They have met with us many times. Thank you guys. Many phone calls, and we want to thank Senator Warner for his vote on the Manchin-Toomey Compromise. We also need to recognize Julia Angelotti. Did I get that right? Julia, she's here representing Congressman Frank Wolf's office. Julia's also met with us many times. Julia, thanks for coming. Tonight we have, here in Fairfax County we don't have mayors, but just to the west of here is the town of Purcellville. Their mayor, Bob Lazaro, is one of the 12 Virginia mayors who has joined the coalition, the Mayors Against Illegal Guns. So Mayor Lazaro is here with us tonight. We also have Lori Haas. Many of you know her from meetings that you've been to on the Hill or perhaps seen her on TV. She's the Virginia organizer for the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence. I always want to say end gun violence. The Coalition to Stop Gun Violence. Lori, where are you? There she is, right here. And we're really fortunate to have some law enforcement members with us in some Fairfax County. We've got Chief Dave Rohr. He was the past chief of Fairfax County Police. He's now the Deputy County Executive for Public Safety. Thank you for coming. Dark up here, but we also, there he is, Officer Pat Lucas, who is our local crime prevention officer here in McLean. So, So that's all the business that I have, and now we're going to move on to our speakers. We've got, first of all, I'm going to introduce everybody, and then I'm just going to exit and let them take over. So Colin Goddard, Colin, give a wave. Colin is the Assistant Director for the Brady Center. Colin was shot at Virginia Tech, and I believe still has 3 bullets in his body. He was shot 4 times, and he has become a national voice for these great issues. He's on the Hill all the time. I know many of you have seen him. We have Karen Morangi. Karen is a senior advisor to the Mayors Against Illegal Guns. There are over 900 mayors have now joined that coalition, so we're glad we've got Karen with us. Peter Ambler, he is co-founder and the strategic director for Gabby Gifford's group, Americans for Responsible Solutions. So thank you, Peter. And then finally, we've got Martina Lyons. I know a lot of you know Martina from having gone to lots of meetings on the Hill with her as well. And Martina is the Northern Virginia director for the Million Moms. She's going to talk to us a little bit about what's happening here in Virginia. So we're going to hear a little bit from each speaker, and then we're going to move to a question and answer period. So I encourage you to have your questions ready. And we've got Lou Ann McNabb, who has worked on this issue here in Northern Virginia for a long time. She's going to moderate our question and answer period. So, Colin, get started.
Hi everyone, good evening. Glad to be with you guys. Thanks for the invitation here from the group of concerned citizens. Thanks to the elected officials, their staff who could make it. Thanks to our police officers who can keep guard on us, and the people who have lost family members to gun violence who continue to speak out on this issue. I'm happy to be with you guys. During my introduction, a bit of my story was told about a crazy day in college at Virginia Tech, craziest day of my life. And usually people would say that, well, that was obviously the reason why I started to do this work, but actually that's not it. It's what I saw happen afterwards and what I learned about the issues of gun policy in America that frankly I thought were unacceptable and had to change. So it was when I saw continued mass shootings happen to other people and nothing seemingly done about it is when I was kind of fed up. And my personal kind of Newtown moment was the shooting at the Binghamton, New York Immigration Center on April 3rd, 2009. That was the first shooting I witnessed after the shooting that I was involved with, and it seemed to be the same series of events play out now with just a different backdrop. And I knew what all these families were going to have to go through, getting a phone call, massing in a hospital somewhere, not even knowing how the loved one was going to be. And it brought me back to the day that my parents got that call and all the emotions that came with it. And I was like, why can we not do something about this? Why does Congress consider this stuff dead on arrival, so to speak? And I was just fed up. And at that point I said, I can't be quiet on this anymore. I had to start speaking out. And my father had become involved in this effort much earlier than I did. I think anytime something happens to your child, you kind of naturally go, how the hell did this happen? What can I do about this? So he was telling me these things that that we actually don't do background checks on all gun sales in America. That the person who shot me passed a background check, but because Virginia never sent his record over to the right place, he was allowed to walk out of that store with a gun. These things I was learning that I couldn't believe. I mean, I didn't think that we sold 100-round drums that you could put in an AR-15. I didn't think you could buy stuff like that just off the market. I didn't think that we didn't actually have a federal anti-gun trafficking statute on the books in this country. I thought that was fairly ridiculous. I didn't know CDC and NIH could no longer do research on these issues and find out the causes and root problems of gun violence because their funding had been continually pulled. I didn't realize that law enforcement couldn't access but just single points of data when trying to figure out bigger gun trafficking schemes. The ATF was actually restricted in who they could share the information with other law enforcement agencies, people who are supposed to enforce these laws. And I couldn't believe that you could actually get a permit to carry a loaded concealed gun in public without actually ever putting one in your hand in the state of Virginia. My dad's got his Virginia concealed carry permit. I love the man, but there's no way in hell I'd want him sitting next to me anywhere with a gun. He's actually never held one in his hand in his life. But all he was allowed to do in Virginia was watch a 1-hour-long video, answer a 20-question quiz, get his background check and his thumb printed, and he was given the permit. Never held a gun in his life, but allowed to legally carry one loaded in public. This stuff was just unbelievable to me, and I wanted to get involved. And so my dad told me about the Brady Center, or the Brady Campaign to Prevent Gun Violence, started from a group that was renamed by Jim and Sarah Brady in the early 90s. Actually, the group started in the late 70s, but changed their name again, and they were the duo, Jim and Sarah, that actually created the first background check system we had in this country. I mean, it was only until 1993 where we started doing background checks on gun sales in America. That's pretty alarming. But since we started that system, we've stopped over 2 million transactions from happening where a gun will have fallen into the hands of a dangerous person. 2 million is a huge number. But clearly the system is not perfect, and we are looking now how to kind of finish the job that the Brady started, require this background check on all sales, and make sure all the missing gaps of information are filled in. So I wanted to get involved in that legislative front. That's what the Brady campaign does, is push federal legislation as well as state legislation across the country. I just came back from testifying in Dover, Delaware, to a limit of high-capacity magazines and a lost and stolen gun reporting requirement. You know, we realize at the Brady campaign, though, that legislation is effective, but it can no longer be just the one front that we advance. We have to also deal with the 300 million guns that are already in circulation in this country, particularly when it comes to violence with young children and school violence. These are guns that are accessed from homes, that people who have guns in their home leave them accessible to their children. We have to deal with behavior changing of people to not allow these firearms to fall into the hands of their children or those who might be suffering from a dangerous mental illness. And we have to deal with the cultural changes as to why somebody would want to sell a gun to somebody else without a background check, a total stranger. These are things that not only do we have to improve via legislation, we all have to change the cultural and behavioral understanding about firearms in this country in a fundamental way. And we do that with programs like the ASK campaign, for parents to ask each other kids are playing together, whether or not there's a gun in the home and it's locked and stored safely. Find ways to bridge that conversation that people might consider a bit awkward at first. But there are easy ways to bring up this conversation. There are other programs like the Speak Up campaign for students to call and report a gun that's brought to school anonymously when they know the information. Quite often, the students know and have a beat on what's going on much quicker and much better than the teachers do. So giving them a way to get involved, to when they see something, say something, and do it anonymously so the correct information. They're not worried about being called a tattletale or whatever. We also have, at the Brady campaign, between our legislative and behavior change programs, a legal action project where we actually take lawyers and defend these laws in court, the good laws, and actually go after the bad laws, and go after the rogue and gun dealers who illegally sell guns to dangerous people. I mean, we've defended families who've lost loved ones to gun violence via a gun that's sold off the books of a gun store. We've defended families who've had gun smugglers easily acquire guns from other sources that were well understood. So between legislation, behavior change, and legal action, in our legal action project, those are kind of the three big encompassing programs that the Brady campaign does in DC. And we're located just off by Metro Center. I started the Brady campaign in 2009, and what I've seen since basically December 14th until now has been nothing short of incredible. There has never been this kind of attention and this kind of enthusiasm on the issue of gun safety and gun violence prevention. I mean, last fall I was literally considering going back to graduate school, doing something else. I just didn't know how to get the American public engaged on this issue. I was very frustrated, and thank God that the application deadline's already passed, or I wouldn't be here. But I stayed, and after Newtown, it's just been a tidal wave of people, new people getting involved, old people who may have worked with Jim and Sarah back in the early 90s, getting involved again. I mean, it's been phenomenal. We've started so many new chapters across the country with new people wanting to get involved. We've worked so much better on a kind of every level with other groups who do this on a regular basis. We have weekly phone calls with many of the representatives from the other organizations here. We're all much on the same page. That said, what happened in the Senate was pretty tough to swallow. Considering also that came the day or two after the 6th anniversary of the shooting at Virginia Tech. That was a really, really, really tough week. And despite the negative headlines that came out, a majority of U.S. senators voted in support of expanding background checks. just wasn't a big enough majority, but a majority nonetheless. And that now we need to understand is 55 votes, because Senator Reid switched on a procedural measure. That 55 is our new baseline. We can only go up from there. And so our job, everyone here who's involved in this issue, is to go from 55 to the 60 votes we need in the Senate. We still believe some strong pressure needs to be applied to the 10, 12 senators who should be supporting this. I mean, frankly, we should apply pressure to every senator who voted no. And people should know now that voting against some of these measures will make you lose 15% approval rating like Senator Ayotte did in New Hampshire. I mean, those are the headlines that we haven't seen on this issue for so long that are beginning to emerge now. I mean, finally, even after the defeat, the narrative wasn't the gun control movement or the gun violence prevention movement isn't effective. It was politics, it was procedural stuff. I mean, so often in the past, though, it had spoken to our kind of ineptitude. And that's not the case anymore, because we are resurging in a way that I've only been described by people who've been doing this for 20 or so years as this is how it was like when Jim and Sarah were doing this. And so it's been very encouraging, like I said, despite the setback that it was. People have often asked me, what kind of tragedy does the American public need to see before something changes? How many more people need to be killed? What number do we need to reach? What's the tragic event that'll do it? And I don't know if there's an event or some number that will be reached before that gets answered. I think that question was answered in a different way when that Senate vote happened and a minority of senators and representing a minority of the U.S. population blocked the will of the majority. That kind of event is what we needed to see. And when Sarah was in the gallery with many other victims of gun violence watching that vote go down, so many of them got up and had this kind of expressionless look on their face, didn't know what to do. Apparently she put her hand over them and said, you know what, sometimes a good defeat can do you some good. And similar to the kind of overwhelming outpouring of people wanting to get involved after the shooting in Newtown, we had similar effects after the vote went down. People were so upset, so pissed off that they came and called and wanted to get back involved, and that's exactly what we needed. So where do we go from here? Keeping pressure on the Senate, as I said. I think we also need to take the same mantra that President Obama gave us before the vote in the Senate and say we deserve a vote. We deserve that vote in the House of Representatives. We deserve to know how our House members stand on some of these basic issues that the senators voted on. And Linda, please let your boss know that we like his co-sponsorship of the background check bill in the House, H.R. 1565. I know that there's been several thousand petitions delivered, which is exactly what you guys need to be doing. I want to commend you for that. But it's keeping your voices and keeping in front of the people who are elected to represent you. That is fundamentally what we have to keep up. And not only in the Senate now, but we also have to look at the House. And I think as of today, there are 160 co-sponsors of the background check bill in the House. You don't need 60% of the House members, you need 51. You need 218 votes, and we're at 160. We haven't had 160 on any piece of good gun policy since I've been doing this. I've never seen a number that high, and it's only going to go higher before we get this final vote. And I think from there we also need to look to 2014, to how we can take these issues out of the state capitals, but put it to the vote of the people via ballot initiatives in the states that allow it. When we did a ballot initiative to close the gun show loophole in Colorado after the Columbine shooting, which was the way 3 of those 4 guns were purchased, Colorado, a Western pro-gun owning state, closed the gun show loophole on a vote of the public 70 to 30. That's huge. And it speaks to the 90% of Americans, the overwhelming majority of us who support these issues, but have a disconnect between our elected officials. That disconnect is slowly closing because people like you are stepping up. We also need to look at the next 2014 elections and onward. People need to fundamentally lose their seat after that no vote in the Senate. I don't know how else to say it. That's something that has to spur a backlash. People have to understand that voting against these ideas is no longer politically viable. And when you go against the will of the 90% of the American public, you will ultimately lose. I honestly do think we have changed the paradigm to whether or not, if something can pass with gun safety, but just when it will happen. And I'll leave you guys with a quote I think I saw from a movie, which is, everything is okay in the end. If it's not okay, then it's not the end. Thanks, guys.
Hi, everybody. I'm a little shorter. Let me readjust. Can folks hear me? That's good. So I'm Karen Morangi. I'm not on your agenda because my colleague Sabrina Milikowski is in New York and Mark Glaze is in Colorado. And we didn't get the information here quite fast enough, apparently, to get it fixed. But I'm part of the senior leadership team for Mayors Against Illegal Guns. Again, my name is Karen Morangi. We have a flyer that I think you'll, well, there's more of you here than I anticipated, but most of you will be able to pick up on the way out to get more information about us. I'll tell you a little bit about the mayors, tell you a lot about what we've been doing and how we kind of see the landscape. And as Colin mentioned, we work a lot with Brady, with the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence, with the other national and local, the moms groups. And we are thrilled that there's more groups like your group and other local groups which are really expanding and becoming more and more active. It's absolutely crucial. So as Colin did, I actually joined the mayor's team in 2009, early 2009. And so I've been on the team through the Gabby Gifford shooting, through the Aurora shooting, shooting in the fall. We thought all of those were about the worst we were going to see. For a little while, at least we hoped. And then, of course, the horrible shooting in Newtown. I am actually the mother of a first grader and a third grader. I live in Arlington, Virginia. So as one of the other moms here said, I think it affects everybody, but particularly if you have children that age, it's quite visionary. So let me tell you about the Mayors. The Mayors was founded about 6 years ago when Mayor Menino of Boston and Mayor Bloomberg of New York came together at Gracie Mansion. They brought in initially about 15 mayors. That was in the middle of the, most people consider low point of gun policy reform in this country. There really wasn't the kind of support we see now, that's for sure. And as mayors, though, they were still seeing the gun violence in their communities. And they were the ones who typically went to the bedside in the hospital when a teenager or a child had been shot. They were the ones who often were comforting the spouse of a law enforcement officer who had been shot. It was very personal to them. Mayor Bloomberg also talks about the fact that by '06, he and his predecessors had worked hard and had already seen significant drops in gun violence in New York City, but they were pretty clearly realizing they knew that New York City's had very good data collection on guns for a long time. They put a lot of resources into that, and it was very clear to them by then that there wasn't too much else they could do within the parameters of their own city. They really needed some national policies to change. Very high percentage, I think it's something like 75, 83% of guns then, and I think it's still true now, that are used in gun crimes in New York, within the confines of New York City, come from out of state. So you can have terrific gun laws, but obviously guns travel pretty easily. I think we all know that. And we live, of course, in a metro area where, crossing state and city lines is, more or less in a blink of the eye. So they came together. They decided that what they wanted to do was forge a kind of moderate path. And instead of focusing on every gun-related issue or a broad swath, they wanted to focus on how do we keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people, largely criminals, felons. These are all people who are prohibited already, but we're getting access. It's a known fact. Any officer, law enforcement officer could tell you they're still getting guns. So in particular, felons and other criminals, folks with very serious mental health issues, and I can kind of say for the panel that when we talk about mental health issues, I think we're all very sensitive to the fact that the vast majority of people with mental health issues never engage in violent activity, and of course, the data shows are more likely to be a victim of crime than to be involved in one. But there is a small subset that, with particular characteristics, that unfortunately you combine those characteristics and guns, and it can lead to some pretty horrific tragedies, and we've seen that, unfortunately, in this country several times in the last few years. So felons, those with very serious mental health issues, domestic violence abusers, we'd like to get terrorists on the list of folks who are prohibited purchasers, if you can believe it or not, people on terrorist watch lists in this country, which there are at least thousands of people. are not prohibited purchasers, and the GAO has done a study, and it showed that 1,400 or so in the last more or less 5 or 6 years have tried to buy guns legally at legal gun dealers. They're not even secretly trying to do it. And what they do is they try to block those sales for other reasons, immigration status or other things. But under our current law, if there is no other reason, there's an obligation to allow the gun sale to go through. So it's estimated that about 1,300 folks on terrorist watch lists on U.S. soil have, had the right, presumably went back and picked up the guns. Of course, doesn't cover the folks who through all the other loopholes, the gun shows, the informal sales and all that are, I'm sure, accessing guns. So the mayors came together and said, we want to work on all these things. They weren't sure how fast the group would grow. It grew very quickly to 100, 150, 200, I'm trying to remember. I think all of us sort of feel like before Newtown and after Newtown, it's just, so much has happened. But I think we're at 400, 450, maybe 500 for Newtown. We're now at 975 or more. So we've had a tremendous outreach to us, which didn't happen so much before Newtown. We're very proud of it. We've done tremendous outreach as well. But we're in 46 states. We have at least 100 Republican mayors in our coalition. There are probably more that just don't self-identify in their elections. And they are really on the ground, as Mayor Purcellville can tell you. This is, you know what's going on in your community, even if it's a big city. You work with law enforcement. And so we have been able to be, I think, a relatively new, unique, credible voice. We've focused a lot since the Gabby Gifford shooting on a couple things, one of which has been growing a grassroots presence. We're now at 1.75 million, 1.5, 1.75 million, depending on how you count it, supporters. So we actually are now the largest grassroots organization in the country, which we've done relatively quickly. We've been blessed, quite fortunately, with Mayor Bloomberg and others' support. I don't think for people in McLean it's a big secret that grassroots and political work and all that happen a lot faster if there's some resources to help grow it. So we've been very fortunate to have those resources. We're still, for sure, outnumbered or outspent by the NRA exponentially, but we've been, I think all of us together, with support from all of you and many others who support a number of these organizations, been able to do a lot. So the mayor, let me tell you a little bit more, I guess, about what the mayors do. Before Tucson, we were already focused on a number of the things Colin mentioned, making sure that you're pushing for more research, pushing to lift the restrictions which limited the ability of law enforcement officers and mayors and others, researchers, to get data on gun violence in this country. We were very focused on the terror gap issue, the terrorists who can get guns, and a number of other issues. Our first, though, kind of big rethinking about what we were going to focus on was the Gabby Gifford shooting. I think, like a lot of people, we thought that might be the moment of a huge sea change in this country. It was a moment of change. I think a lot of people did get awoken from that, but Newtown was exponentially, a different experience for all of us working on this. But after Newtown, after Tucson, we brought our mayors together, our leadership team together, other, people thoughtful in this space, and really thought, what else should we be doing? It's a time, we felt, to take a chance to do something a bit bolder. And that's where we really made our commitment to focusing on trying to ensure that there are background checks for everybody in this country. The way the gun laws that have developed in our country is really, there have been major change after horrible shootings. So the first major change was the Gun Control Act of 1968. That was after John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King were murdered. That set up the framework, saying these dangerous categories of folks should not have guns, but did very little to actually ensure that they didn't get guns. It made it illegal, but there weren't too many other steps put in place at that time. But through other work, and particularly Brady's work, the background check system came to be, and then it became more robust. But we did analysis, and others have too, and the reality is that 40 to 50% of gun sales in this country are outside the background check system. People ask where those figures come from. The 40% figure is actually, it is quite old because nobody's been allowed in the federal government to do this analysis for a long time. And it was pre-internet, so we think it's probably on the low side, if anything, but 40%, it's a DOJ analysis from a good 10 years ago. The 50% figure is the fact that Michigan is a state, so you've got the federal laws, which are basically the floor in this country, and you have states like Michigan, California, New York, a number of others, Virginia for some things, have put in place additional policies. Michigan requires a background check, as do about 14 other states, one way or another, either permit or background check before you buy all handguns, or in many places, all guns. Michigan does that, and they require an indication of where the gun was purchased. And so from there, it's about 48% of guns are not being purchased from licensed firearm dealers. These are, again, legal. This is the legal gun sales. So again, we think 40–50% is pretty safe. Virginia does not have a requirement of background checks for all gun sales, so it's probably something in that range are happening where people are, there's a very robust legal sale of guns system in this country. Armstrader.com, if you haven't been on their website, you can go on there. There are, certain communities, Maine has got a very robust classified ad system. Florida's got a number of online gun sale internet sites, and people typically, connect up like you would connect up on Craigslist to sell a dresser. They'll connect up and, buy and sell a gun in the Safeway parking lot. And they probably should be checking in most states for the identification to make sure they're at least selling to a state resident. But even if they do that, as I think we all know, that doesn't indicate if you're a felon, if you've been convicted of abusing your spouse. It doesn't indicate, if you have other categories that you should be a prohibited purchaser. And I keep thinking about what happened in Cleveland and how that was in some ways a fairly normal neighborhood, and people had no clue what was going on. So for me, for those people who say, well, I know my friends, I know my neighbors, I hope you do, I hope you do. I think we all like to think we do, but I prefer to have a background check. And the other thing I'll say is in the states that have the background check systems under state law, gun sales are happening just fine. Gun shows typically are still happening. In fact, in California, they did an analysis before and after they required background checks for all gun sales, and the attendance at gun shows actually went up. And some people think that's because people felt more comfortable bringing their families. They were known places before that and are known places in other states for gang members and others, because you just go in and show your driver's license. Again, it doesn't indicate any criminal history. So after Tucson, we said we're going to focus a lot on background checks, and that was also, our mayors thought that was a good idea, but also law enforcement. We heard again, state, local, federal law enforcement, that that's the thing that would make the biggest difference. It's also the thing that polls very well, but the main reason we have been such strong advocates, as have a number of the other national and other organizations, is because that's what makes the difference. That's how you make sure people with criminal histories, serious mental health issues, meaning they've been adjudicated mentally ill by a court or the equivalent to a court. It's quite a high standard that those folks can't get guns. So for 2 years we worked a lot on the background checks. You may have heard about our truck that went around. We started talking a lot about the fact that it averages out to 33 people a day are murdered in this country. A lot of people think that's people who are killed in this country. It's actually people who are murdered. It's more than double that who commit suicide or are victims of an accidental gun shooting. So we have, if you compare us to other industrialized countries, our rates of gun shootings and deaths by gun are just significantly higher than everywhere else when you combine all that together. So Newtown. Well, we were all working hard before Newtown, and when Newtown hit, I was actually had been out and had been working on some other projects I work on, and was sort of taking a little bit of a breather from gun stuff. And I remember I was a little bit offline for a couple hours before the holidays. I was trying to, as a working parent, trying to think about maybe picking up a couple Christmas gifts on my way back from a working lunch. And I walked back into my office, and it was just wham. And all the emotions I'm sure all of you felt, and then the realization that we're going to have to work our tails off and really, make sure that we don't have another shooting like this happen again. So, so that's what we've been doing. At that point, we also reassessed. Before that, for example, the mayors had not had a position on the assault weapon ban. We had not had a position on high-capacity magazines. We really focused on who has the guns, not which models they could access. But with this shooting, our mayors, and again, talking to law enforcement and others, we concluded that it really was time. If you do a thoughtful assault weapon ban, we weighed in with Senator Feinstein's office, as did others, and tried to make that a thoughtful piece of legislation. We agreed that 10 bullets is really, we're talking to hunters and other communities, most people say if you can't shoot it, well, in many, I think under federal law, you can only have 3 bullets in your rifle to shoot a duck on any federal land, as it is, and I'm not a hunter, but people I know who really are say that, if you can't shoot a duck in 3 shots, probably shouldn't be out shooting anyhow. So, so we decided to support that, but we focused more than anything, again, on the background checks. And we were also disappointed in the vote on April 17th, but as Colin said, it was more than, really 56 votes, which was pretty huge given where we've been. That night, I said to colleagues and friends, I think we have 5 or 10 new members that we probably wouldn't have had supporting us a few months ago or a couple of years ago, and I went back the next morning and tallied it up, and I'd say, depending on how you count it, it's more like 18 or 20. So that I hope you all actually feel good about the fact that you helped to move the dial to get probably somewhere between 18 and 20, depending on what date you picked before and after, but a number of members who I don't think would have necessarily voted that way had there not been everything that happened. It helped tremendously, of course, that the administration weighed in so strongly. We had been begging, prodding, annoying, doing everything we could for 4 years to try and get them to speak out in some way on guns. And I think the president said a little bit after Tucson, said almost nothing else about guns ever. And then it was all of a sudden just like a time warp or a, just sea change. The president and vice president's commitment, and I can tell you from meetings I've been in and colleagues have been in, it's quite sincere. But, let's all keep our encouragement up. So let me just tell you a couple more things, and then I'll turn it over because I know I've been talking longer than I intended to. 2 things. One statistic that I like for folks to hear that they haven't always heard is the domestic violence issue. Guns and domestic violence are just an incredibly dangerous combination. And there's been a study now of states which require background checks for all gun sales and states that don't, with an overlay of domestic violence. When you have background checks, 38% fewer women are murdered with guns by their intimate partners, by their spouses and boyfriends, most typically. 38%. When you actually do kind of a control and say how many are killed in those states, with or without background checks, with non-guns and other ways, it's static. It's equivalent. So background checks are absolutely saving lives. And I'll give you a sad example of that, is the spa shooting that happened at the mall in Wisconsin in the fall. The wife, the mother, who was going about her business working in the spa, and her estranged husband had received a domestic violence order against him a week or 2 before. He went online, he bought a gun. He actually had an order out against him, a restraining order, so he was not allowed to buy a gun. We're quite sure that that was in the system, but he circumvented it by going online and buying the gun. Went over a few days later, shot her, shot 3 other women. Many, of course, family members impacted, all those families, a national news story again. If they'd been in Michigan, even an online sale, instead of being in Wisconsin, would have required a background check. And, you can reasonably say families might have been spared. So the last thing I'll say is if you want to engage with us, you've got one of our websites on here, mayorsagainstillegalguns.org, our kind of unwieldy one. You can go there. We've got tremendous research. We've done undercover operations. If you want to see what gun shows really look like, if you want to see how easy it is without going to one, if you don't want to go out to Chantilly and you want to see what it's like, you can go there. We've had undercover folks who have tested the fact that it's very easy, even if you say, I couldn't pass a background check, will you still sell to me? Overwhelmingly, sales will still happen. But if you want to be on our sort of activist side, and I hope many of you will or already are, you can go, our new website for that is demandaction.org, and that's on the flyer outside, but demandaction.org. And if you sign up on that, when we see key moments where we need calls and letters and things going in, we'll certainly notify you. So I'm going to stop there and just say thank you, everybody. It's really fabulous to see so many of you here tonight. We really appreciate it.
Hello. So my name is Peter Ambler. I work for Americans Responsible Solutions. Work for Gabby Gifford and Mark Kelly, who are all our bosses. Most of you probably had never heard of Gabby Gifford before she was shot about 2.5 years ago. Well, she wasn't anything special. She was just a third generation, gun-owning congresswoman from a Republican district with a ranch with lots of rattlesnakes, and the only Democratic congresswoman in a Republican district who won re-election in 2010. She was somebody who fought hard for everything that she believed in. She was an up-and-comer. She still is. In any case, about 2.5 years ago, January 8th, 2011, everything changed for Gabby, for our office. I worked for her at the time. And sort of the journey that sort of ends up to this point today for her started. She spent about 2 weeks in the hospital in Tucson. She moved to the rehabilitation hospital in Houston, where her husband Mark Kelly lived. She spent 6 months in the hospital there. Came back to Mark's house, did several months of outpatient rehab. She resigned from Congress. She moved back to Tucson with Mark. They lived together, so husband and wife for the very first time. It is something of a commuter marriage up to that point, an astronaut and a congresswoman. In any case, all that while, they never imagined that their sort of public-facing work, that their public project was going to have anything to do with gun violence. After the shooting in Tucson, which Gabby doesn't remember, you had Aurora, you had Oak Creek, you had a terrible drumbeat of gun violence in America, where 33 people are murdered through guns every day. And then Newtown happened. Mark was in China, and Gabby was home in Tucson, and Mark got on the phone with Gabby, and they started talking about what had happened. And Gabby said, enough talking about it, we need to do something. And trying to figure out what something was, they wanted to do something consistent with their backgrounds and their beliefs. They're both gun owners. Gabby is a gun owner. She owns the same kind of gun she shot with. She's used to enjoy going shooting. Mark is the son of 2 Jersey cops, a combat veteran, of course, an astronaut, and also a gun owner. They live so far out in the desert. The Giffords Ranch is so far out in the desert that you run out of asphalt, about 30 or 40 minutes before you get to the house. And guns are just a way of life, as they are for many, many Americans. So what they wanted to do is something where they wanted to prevent gun violence, but in such a way that was consistent with their beliefs about the Second Amendment, which is that the Second Amendment confers on all Americans the individual right to own guns. But they understood that with that right comes some very important responsibilities. And those responsibilities are things like keeping guns out of the hands of criminals, seriously mentally ill, terrorists, spousal abusers, things like that. They also wanted to reject the false premise that when you legislate on the tricky issue of guns in America, that you have to choose between, cherishing your Second Amendment rights on one hand and preventing gun violence on the other. And there are a lot of people that will tell you that you have to choose, but take it from gun owners like Gabby Mark and a lot of their friends in Tucson around the country that you absolutely don't have to. So, long story short, on the January 8th, 2013, just a few weeks after the Newtown shooting, on the 2-year anniversary of the Tucson shooting, we founded America's Responsible Solutions. Since then, we've had highs and lows. We had a real low when the Senate failed to achieve a 60-vote majority to pass a very sensible bipartisan background checks compromise. But shortly thereafter, there was a high, and that was, for the first time in a long time, the palpable sense that Americans were actually angry at their Congress for not protecting them from gun violence. So, Gabby wrote in the New York Times the day after the vote, she said, "I'm outraged." And it turned out that millions and millions of Americans were outraged right along with her. And you've seen that in polling across the country. Senator Ayotte was a very relatively popular congresswoman and former law enforcement official who had gone out of her way to present a moderate image, and now all of a sudden, in her approval, she's underwater, her disapproval for higher than her approvals. You have Jeff Flake, who voted against the background checks bill in our state of Arizona, and overnight he became the most unpopular senator in America, overtaking Mitch McConnell, and that takes some work. And so, we looked at the vote and what happened, and we said, how could this have happened? How could the United States Senate find itself on the wrong side of a 90-10 issue? The wrong side of an issue that 90% of Americans say you should do one thing, and the Senate says, okay, we're going to go ahead and do the other. And the fundamental answer is that senators look at the polls. And it's not that they don't believe them. It's just that they don't think that y'all are going to vote on that. They don't think that at the end of the day, when you go to the ballot box, that Americans who pick up the phone and pollster calls, or who sign up for MAIG or Brady or America's Responsible Solutions, that they are going to condition their vote on their representative, their senator, having a irrational position on gun violence. So, whose responsibility is it to change things? Essentially, it's yours. People in this audience, and I'm sure most of you guys are 95% of the way there, but people around this country, what we need to do is go from something where we say, yes, this is something that we think, we agree that background checks are a policy that our members of Congress should vote for and that would prevent gun violence and so forth, to fundamentally letting them know, letting our members of Congress know, letting the United States senators know that they won't be reelected if they don't vote with the majority of their constituents. So we'll, at America's Responsible Solutions, Gabby and Mark, we want to work right alongside with you all. We are in 4 months we've been in existence for over 400,000 members and growing. We've raised $11 million from 60,000 donors. And we are looking forward to taking this common sense message of responsible gun ownership, of preventing gun violence, to people in every part of this country, to members of Congress who have historically thought that they might support something that would be oriented towards preventing gun violence,
all of the Million Mom marches, chapters in our state. I would like to start out by thanking the Mayor's Group and Americans for Responsible Solutions, because for so many years, the Brady campaign and the coalition were sort of out in the wilderness on our own. I don't want to use the word fighting, but there isn't a softer word to use, for sensible gun laws in the state of Virginia for 13 long years. I wish I could tell you that Virginia is a state that we could all be proud of, but I can't, not regarding gun violence prevention. At the federal level, we can be proud of both of our state senators who represent us in Congress for voting for the background check bill. So thank you to Senator Warner and Senator. In particular, I would like to thank Senator Kaine for being so brave, so unfiltering. He is absolutely, unequivocally, 100% behind us on everything. Background checks, assault weapons bans. If you are going to represent people of this country, you have to protect them. You have to protect the people of this country and not the gun manufacturers. So there are some bright spots in Virginia. H.R. 1565 that Colin mentioned, which is the equivalent to the Toomey Mansion bill that failed initially, only in round one, we are coming back for round two in the House, has been co-sponsored by 3 of our representatives. I wish I could tell you that one of them was a Republican, because this is not a partisan issue, folks. This has nothing to do with politics and everything to do with public safety. But sadly, at this point, only Representatives Connolly, Moran, and Scott have signed on to that. I hope that with some moral courage, Representative Wolf will co-sponsor H.R. 1565. Now, in terms of the General Assembly, that's a fun place. It really truly is akin to beating your head against a wall. It is absolutely shocking to see what happens to the most sensible of bills. They will pass the Senate, no problem, flying colors, and they make it to this little subcommittee in the House called the Militia and Police Subcommittee. And they are killed. No matter how pragmatic, no matter how sensible, they are killed, and there's no recorded vote. So nobody gets any blame for it. I encourage you to come down and watch what happens. We're talking very sensible bills. Last year, for example, we had a bill, all it was going to do was line up a list of people who were not legally allowed to buy guns for various reasons. They've committed crimes or they've been adjudicated mentally ill, with the list that people sell them to. It was a no-brainer. It passed through the Senate, and they killed it in militia and police. So they basically said, no, we want them to be able to continue selling guns to people who aren't really supposed to be buying them. Because let's face it, as we heard from Karen, 40 to 50% of gun sales in this country are without background checks. So if you make it tighter, then you're cutting off a big part of the sales. So what we have, and this is the honest-to-goodness reality, is we have 2 sides. We have law enforcement, pediatricians, emergency room doctors who have to treat gunshot wound victims, parents, victims, teachers who just want to teach their children and not worry about a gunman coming in the classroom. We have 90% of the American public. And yet what happens? Who do they listen to? They listen to the gun industry, and And the only people supporting the gun industry who benefit from these laws that they're preventing are criminals, terrorists, gang members. It's shameful. We need help in Virginia. It is a short legislative session, but we need a lot of help from people who would be willing to come down a few days, one day, whatever you can do. We have a fabulous, fabulous hero. His name is Andy Goddard, and he just so happens to be Colin's father, who volunteers his time to work this issue. But just to give you an idea about what his life is like during the legislative session, in one 24-hour period, last session, he had to testify on 14 bills. Because you see, what happens in Virginia, not only do we not get good, sensible laws passed, like background checks at gun shows, but we have to fight defensively against all these ridiculous bills that are put forth by the gun lobby. And, you know, if any of you like football like I do, it's a lot more fun to play offense than defense. So, come to Richmond and help us. There is a form that some of you may have asking what you might be willing to do to help us in Richmond, but we really don't want Andy to have any 24-hour days again like that. We need other people who are willing to testify. We need other people who are willing to contact their representatives in the General Assembly, their delegates and their senators. We need people who understand that you have to look at a candidate's record. Don't just assume because a candidate is one party or another that they're voting the right way. It doesn't happen that way. So you have to check their records and see how they vote. And then you have to go help elect the good guys and good gals and kick out the bad ones. So, I'm going to leave you with a few thoughts. Number one, as I just said, we need to elect the right people. Number two, in Virginia, we absolutely have to elect the right governor, because what will happen is our irresponsible legislature will send the governor dangerous bills. And if it's not the right governor, he will sign them, as we have witnessed under our present governor, who signed the turning back of one handgun a month, who's allowed guns in bars. I'm proud to say that when Kane was our governor, he vetoed all those bad bills. We need another governor that will veto the bad gun bills. And we need more advocates who will work with us in Richmond, as you have all so wonderfully done at the national level. And then my final thought, and this is a personal thought, and it's one I've been thinking about a lot. A lot of my colleagues here tonight are very fortunate in that this is their vocation. This is what they get to do full-time. I'm a full-time working mother. This is my passion. So I do this on the side, but I spend almost as many hours doing this as I do my paying job. It really matters to me, because I think it is just incomprehensible that in this great country, we allow special interests to dictate our laws. And that is exactly what is happening. Exactly. So as frightening as it is to me that we have such horribly lax gun laws, it is more frightening to me that we have allowed a Congress to become so irresponsible that they disregard 92% of Americans. We cannot tolerate this, people. So get out there, vote for the right people, keep fighting for sensible gun laws, and thank you all very much.
Question and answer period. I would like to acknowledge Peter Reed, who's sitting in the front. Peter lost his daughter Mary at Virginia Tech and has been an incredible advocate as well. And Lori Haas also works with Andy tirelessly in Richmond during the General Assembly, so I want to acknowledge her efforts as well. All right, so does anyone have a question? Hard for me to see. Yes?
I have a bunch of them, but I'll start with this one. This is for Karen. You alarmed me about the terrorist watch list. Is that included in the Manchin-Toomey bill, the inclusion of that for background checks, and also HR 1565?
Speak louder, move closer. Can you hear me? Is that working? No, it's not part of Manchin-Toomey or HR 1565. It's a separate bill that Senator Lautenberg, it's a separate bill out there. We're actually going to do a lot of work, and I actually didn't mention, because I knew I was going on long already, all the work that the mayors are now able to do in the field and in the media. And so our field and media teams are going to start elevating that issue. You'll probably start seeing more about it. We did that a few years ago when there was a hearing happening and other things, and we've been fighting in other ways for a long time, but it is pretty shocking. The list, just so you're educated on these issues, the no-fly list and the terrorist watch list are actually separate, but there's presumably some overlap there. There are multiple terrorist watch lists. The way the bill is set up, it's a very sensible bill. The legislation that we support and that Senator Lautenberg and others have put forward the last few Congresses is based on legislation which the Bush administration lawyers at the Department of Justice drafted in 05, 06. This is really after 9/11, as a result of 9/11. So it's, thoughtfully done. I'm a trained lawyer. It's very lawyerly. It's set up so that the Attorney General has the authority to bar gun sales to people on the terror watch list. So if they want a gun sale to go through for some reason, if it's an ongoing investigation or they have other compelling reasons that they want to watch the gun sale, they would be allowed to do that. It also provides both administrative and expedited court review for people who go in to buy a gun. For those of you who have not been in gun stores, if you go in to buy a gun and you're denied, you're not told why. You're just told either right on the spot, I'm sorry, there's a denial, your background check did not go through, or in a very small subset of situations, let's say you've got a 3-day hold, and that's when the FBI and others are looking to see, often in a domestic violence situation, it's a very limited set of domestic violence circumstances that qualify for the prohibiting of gun sales. So, for example, if people were not married or there's not a share a child together, other situations, under federal law, you can't be prohibited from purchasing a gun. You can in many states or some states under state law. But, so there's these complicating situations where sometimes there's a 3-day hold, but regardless, you're not told why. Well, if someone figures out, well, I'm not a felon, I don't have serious mental health problems, I don't have a restraining order out against me, maybe I'm on the terror watch list, the bill has written into it ways that administratively or through the court system you could go through and check or get your name off the watch list. The thing that we've heard most consistently against it, oh, the watch list is terrible, Ted Kennedy was on it, 6-year-olds were on it. Well, they've done a lot to clean up the watch list, and what we also have said even several years ago is then work with us to push the administration to clean up the watch list. But let's not have people who were terrorist suspects, and let's remember they're domestic, as we just saw in Boston, and there are militias and other folks who are gathering arms in various parts of the country. Probably be better if they couldn't buy guns quite so easily. So, thank you.
If I could just add, not to further alarm you, but there is an Al-Qaeda training video, which clearly shows on the video the best place to buy guns is in America because you can buy whatever you want, any kind of weapon, no background check.
And it goes to, there's Adam Gadon, an American who had joined Al-Qaeda, who put this video, and he said, go to gun shows, go to convention centers, you can buy guns. The U.S. is awash in guns, which is true. But the combination of saying you have to do background checks wherever you buy a gun, which take 2 or 3 minutes typically, and saying if you're on the terror watch list, you can no longer easily buy, typically you won't be able to buy a gun. That combination, I firmly believe would keep, my family and our families a lot safer. I'd sure sleep better at night.
you. I'd like to acknowledge State Senator Barbara Favola, who came in late. Did you have a question? Go ahead.
This may be a little off-center, and not quite to the panelists, but if one or two wonderful folks, Luke or Nick, might be willing to answer what might be the best framing to persuade somewhat recalcitrant senators about this. If you're willing to have one of them help us frame it, Luke or Nick. Mike right there.
Yeah, can people hear me if I talk this loud? Okay, I didn't get this question in advance. You know, I think what's unfolding is, in this whole debate on background checks, is basically how the system should work. And that is, this is an issue that a year ago wasn't on, I shouldn't say it wasn't on anybody's screen, but as a practical matter, the idea that we would be debating and voting on background checks and closing the gun show loophole wasn't really on anybody's screen. Senator Warner and others had been working on the school safety bill, and even that we were having a hard time getting past through the Senate. So the idea that we got 56 votes, while heartbreaking that it didn't pass, was still quite an accomplishment. And I think what you're seeing since then is the system is working, which is folks had to vote yes or no. They couldn't vote maybe. People who disagree with, and what's true is it's going to happen on both sides. It's not just folks who voted against this who are now in the sights of people who want them to change their votes, which is true of a bunch of senators, Republicans and but also folks who voted for background checks. I mean, make no mistake, the NRA was very much against this. So in my mind, I think the system is doing what it's supposed to do, and that is we're not done. My sense is we're going to vote again. And I think I have to think if there was a surprise in the vote, it was that when Senator Toohey from Pennsylvania was the Republican who joined Senator Manchin, I think our expectation was he was going to bring more Republicans with him. But as I think some of the speakers said, we've seen what's going on in New Hampshire, and that is democracy, how it's supposed to work without casting any judgment on Senator Hayes. And you've seen some of Senator Blake's more colorful announcements since he passed his vote. So this isn't going away. It's going to come back. And I don't think folks know exactly when it's coming back. But people who voted will now know who stands.
Just so you know, if you don't want to raise your hand, you can send a question in on a piece of paper, but a couple of the questions that have come up have to do with concealed carry reciprocity. And we found that a number of senators voted against the bill. In other words, do you all understand what concealed carry reciprocity is? Is if you get a permit in a state where there's not many requirements, if that bill should pass, you will be able to carry your concealed weapon into states that have more stringent rules. If there were more senators who voted against this bill than for the background check bill, is that correct? So the questions are, what can we do to change those numbers to make senators understand that if New York doesn't want concealed carry permits coming from states such as Alabama, how do we prevent something like that?
Virginia.
Or Virginia. Or Virginia.
Just show them how easy it is to get one here in Virginia. I mean, it's a joke. You can do it on the internet. I mean, like I said, my father has his. He's never held a gun in his life. You can do that in several states, not only Virginia. And so, tell that. Actually do it yourself. Watch the video. Answer the quiz. Seriously, questions are like, what is a magazine? Like something that you read, something that you put bullets into that goes. I mean, the questions are so fundamental. Anyone can do this. And I encourage you to do it and show it to your members to say, look, I have this. I've never held a gun, or I've never shot a gun in my life. Is this a good idea? Is this responsible policy? I mean, that's what I think we should be doing.
I would add a couple things. One is, unless it's changed in the last couple of years, the permit to have a concealed carry, to carry your concealed loaded gun around in the streets of Virginia looks nothing really different than the library card I got as a kid. It's typed up on white paper. I've said in a number of meetings, jokingly, but I'm not really joking, that my kids and I could make, a counterfeit awfully easily on my home printer. It's not laminated or anything. The permitting requirements and what the permits look like, and the fact that Virginia and a number of states don't have photos, we hear from law enforcement make it very challenging and dangerous for them to be stopped by the side of the road, which is a very typical stop. And in many states, maybe everywhere, folks have got to identify if they're carrying concealed, so they'll say, I have a concealed weapon in the car, I have a permit. Then, so in Virginia, we're going to start seeing if this passes. Literally, you only have to be 18 in Montana to carry concealed. In Vermont, depending which bill passes, Vermont and Arizona and a few other states, you don't have to have a permit. Under the worst versions of these, which have come under consideration in the U.S. Senate, people from states that don't require a permit would be able to come with no screening at all, no background check. Remember, they could have gotten the gun anywhere, no screening to carry it loaded in their own state. They're going to start coming to visit the Arlington Cemetery. They're going to start coming to visit D.C. and probably making a mistake and carry in D.C. where they'll probably be against the law, but Virginia won't go. So I live, in a very urban part of Arlington. I'm going to go out to the local restaurant, and there's, the bar or restaurant, there's going to be people carrying concealed. It's been a battle. We fought very hard against that. The other just quick thing I'll say in concealed carry is that, I'll say on really all these issues, I'll tell you something I've learned. I've been in and out of Congress as a staff person and as a lobbyist and doing policy work for about 20 years now. And I knew this, but it's really been hit home. Some of the members who voted against the background checks or voted for concealed carry reciprocity have said publicly, and others have said privately, listen, the polling which the mayor sponsored in most cases shows, 79 to 99% of Americans, depending on the district or the state, support background checks for all gun sales. We pounded that, and other people did, pounded that into their offices, and presumably the members heard it a few times, but their calls did not reflect that. Now, if any statisticians are in this room, you're going to probably have a heart attack, but folks are taking the calls and tremendously overweighing what they mean, at least in my opinion, as compared to properly done, sophisticated national polling of likely voters. And Heidi Heidekamp from North Dakota said, listen, the calls were 7-1 against background checks into my district. 94% of people poll saying they want background checks. But the passion has not been there. We need all of you. One of the things you do tomorrow is if you've got friends and neighbors, or former neighbors, or family members who live in other states, call them, email them, say, call your member of Congress. All they have to say is, please support background check reform. Please support these good gun law reforms. They don't have to know much more than that for them to call or email.
And I'll just say one final comment about concealed carry in Virginia. Prior to 2009, you actually had to have some type of competency to get a concealed carry permit. You had to take a gun safety class. You had to prove you could shoot a gun at a firing range. And then along came Ken Cuccinelli, and he introduced a bill, which is now law, that eliminates this requirement. So now all you have to do, as Colin told us, is go online, take a 20-question test, and you've got your concealed carry permit.
Good evening, my name is Ray Reeling. I'm working with Kathleen Murphy, who we heard from earlier. She's running for delegate. She went to see Barbara Comstock, who was one of those delegates who votes for all guns all the time. If you'd like to get involved with us, please feel free to come up and speak with me or Kathleen after the meeting. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, I just want to make a comment on that. I'm a gun owner here in Virginia, and I've had a permit to carry in the past. And as far as I know, the clerk of the court, wherever
talking about the certificate of competency that you can, what did you print off on your home computer after watching a 1-hour video and answering the pointed question quiz. You take that to your clerk of court, and then they fingerprint you and run the background check, and then you get it after that process. But you don't actually have to put a gun in your hand, which is what we're saying, to prove that you're competent with a firearm and then granted a permit to carry one vote into the public.
Yeah, well, my point is that the actual court approves the permit.
Right, once
That's
this,
where the permit comes
After
from.
they see
Correct,
the
yeah.
data, that's great, isn't it?
yeah, after they see your certificate of competency, and then your fingerprints, and then your background check, and then you're good to go.
I think Lori Haas would be good to speak to this issue.
That's something.
Currently in the state of Virginia, it used to be a may issue state, and a judge in a court had the option to look at the evidence and say, you don't quite qualify, I think you're a risk, you get information from police officers. Virginia is now what is called a shall issue state. You fill out the form and the answers are all yes, they have to give you the permit. There is no judgment by the court system. The process still continues to go through the court, but there is no judgment called by the judge in the circuit court. Now, as a matter of fact, if the paperwork is complete and accurate, the clerk in the court can issue the permit. There is no vote hearing before a judge, number one. Number two, fingerprints are now not allowed in the state of Virginia, so we're not even 100% certain, with, identity theft is prevalent, that we've got the right person. What they're trying to do in the state of Virginia is chip away at the concealed carry permitting process so that one day they can go in front of the General Assembly and in front of their colleagues and say, the permitting process is so wide open, it has so many holes in it, just like the one gun a month, we just got to get rid of it. So it's, while there is value to some persons for having a concealed carry, I understand that. There is some value to different people. And a lot of people take their gun ownership very responsibly. They train on the gun, they learn to have the muscle memory that it takes and don't lose their peripheral vision. And concealed carry permitting, when left without a process, without an oversight, guns can get into dangerous hands. My personal concern is with law enforcement. We have reciprocity with other states when, with those states that our law enforcement can check the permit 24/7. There's a state trooper out in the middle of the night, he pulls somebody over, that person identifies, I've got a gun on me, officer, I'm a concealed carry permittee. If our state law enforcement or our local law enforcement, they have a data bank they can go to 24/7, they have a comfort level with that person. Okay, he's a concealed carry permit holder, maybe I'm not as nervous, maybe I don't have to be in a self-defensive position, maybe I don't have to be in an offensive position with my firearm. So one of my personal concerns is the safety of our law enforcement when they come across persons with a firearm. So currently, we only have reciprocity with states that have 24/7 access to their concealed carry data bank. Our state police tell me personally, they don't want concealed carry reciprocity blanket across the United States because it puts our law enforcement in danger over and above the lack of training, the lack of oversight, the lack of background checks. So it has been a privilege to carry concealed carry in the state of Virginia. That privilege is being chipped away. I think it's the endangerment of all of us and our law enforcement.
Well, if you can restore accountability in that process.
That's what I'm saying. I personally don't have a problem with concealed carry permitting for certain persons who prove their expertise with the firearm or a need, that sort of thing, but we have chipped away at the process to the point it really is dangerous.
And I know it's a concern. I've been to the Chantilly Gun Show a number of times, and individuals who train others in firearms, it is concern to them that people are not being trained actually with a firearm. They can just take this test online. Say, yes, ma'am.
I want to know whether or not assault weapons ban and the high-capacity magazine are under discussion, are off the table. Are we just going to have to wait for another mass shooting where everybody turns to convictions or whatever? I can't understand why we don't talk about that as well. This is important.
So,
Will you repeat that?
sure, the question was, there's been more discussion tonight, more discussion in the media since the recent votes. There was a string of votes that came together on background checks, assault weapon ban, ICAP magazine, concealed carry reciprocity, federal trafficking of guns, straw purchasing. And the one that got the highest affirmative votes was the background check bill. And to be honest, I think for when this package or a bill comes up in the Senate, we hope in the next few months. I think that's, as Luke Galby said, we agree. The mayors and others here are working very hard to make that happen, that it's very likely there will be another Senate vote on gun issues. I think it is most likely to be just on the background check bill for right now. But I would encourage all of you that care about these other issues to still weigh in with your congresspeople. If you know, for example, if you're in Jim Moran's, district, he's fine on all these issues, but you surely have friends and neighbors in neighboring districts in Virginia, and I bet you do in other parts of the country, and email is pretty cheap and easy to encourage them to call or email. Sign on to all our petitions too, but just call and email directly and say you care about all these things, because people need to hear it.
And to go to that for our notes, Luke and Nicholas, we've had two questions regarding Senator Warner's votes on concealed carry and assault weapon.
Yes.
Perhaps you could explain where his thinking was on those.
Yes, please. Yes.
Use the microphone, please, this time. Use the microphone this time. Sure. In the back.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Is Maggie Luca in the audience anywhere? Maggie has been a close friend of Senator Warner's for years and years and years, and I saw her the other night, and she said, I just want to tell you, after a couple of those votes Senator Warner cast, I called you up, I got your voicemail, I yelled into the voicemail, I said some things I kind of regret saying, and then I realized I was talking to the other Luke in my contacts. I was calling the wrong guy. So, it's fair to say that we have heard a lot of criticism of some of the votes Senator Warner cast. If I could talk about how the system works, I think let's start with concealed carry, and I'm authorized tonight to say partly because of the good work that Lori Haas has done. Among other things, she's a squatter in our office routinely. And also because, Lori made a compelling case, the same arguments that she made that you just heard. And what Senator Warner has authorized us to say tonight is he now is, I want to get the right word here, rethinking his views on this issue based on... Before you start clapping, I didn't say he's changing his views. What I said is this whole idea of minimum standards, like the 24/7 check that Lori's talking about, he's listening and rethinking. Did I get that?
Well, why does he want to do it?
Say that again.
Why does he think reciprocity is a good idea? Let's hear that.
Yeah, no, I'll
Why did he vote for it? Right.
You know what, this was also a vote, the Senate voted on this issue, I think, 18 months ago or 2 years ago. Is that right?
Two and a half. Congress talked about last or 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I think that he felt like if a Virginian had a concealed carry permit and they were traveling to other states, they should have the right to do what, you can...
Not voting on it.
Okay, that's fine, that's fine.
Although encourage on Senator Warner's part would be nice.
Okay, let
No, that's fine, listen, please, this is what democracy's about, that's fine, that's fine.
But I have a problem with why the bad guys and the gun owners are the ones that everybody's listening to, and no one's listening to the facts. I mean, these high-capacity guns and magazines and all of this other stuff, the idea is absurd. It isn't practical. It's not logical. But everybody's like, oh, we can't touch it because the NRA's against it. I mean, who is the NRA? McCain was not elected in I know. He's just elected. You know what I'm saying? These people that
originally from Vermont and worked for Senator Leahy for 20 years. And one thing I think Karen said was, there's no requirements for concealed carry in Vermont. Is that right?
You can
Okay, in Vermont, you basically, there are no laws. There are no gun laws in Vermont, or at least they weren't when I was there. You basically, if you're a defendant in a criminal case, you can't bring a weapon into the courtroom, but you can shoot a deer on the State House lawn. At least you could until recently. You can shoot fish. It's the only state in the union where you can shoot fish. And it happens that there is less violent crime in the state of Vermont than there is in any other state in the union, with no gun laws. So this idea that everybody has, the NRA has everybody wrapped around their little finger, I just don't accept. I mean, 56 senators just voted for background checks, which was opposed strenuously by the NRA. And if you've seen what they've been doing to Senator Manchin, that's a perfect example of folks standing up.
And without closure, the whole dynamic would have changed. On the other side of the state, strongest gun laws.
Let me just say one other thing. Nicholas and I are happy to stay tonight as long as people want. I don't want to hijack this. So we're happy to stay after, and if we want to have a little mini meeting about Senator Warner's record, I'm more than happy.
Okay, another question was, what is the first priority for Virginia? What does this group need to do first for this state?
In terms of the General Assembly, if nothing happens at the federal level by January, we need a background check bill in Virginia. That's the number one.
That in the governor?
Well, okay. First there's elections come November. November's the first thing. Second thing is then the background check bill, because you're absolutely right. What happens in November is going to dictate the future of our state for a very long time.
Further, Representative Cantor, Representative Wolf, Representative Ridgel, Representative Griffith, Representative Goodlatte, Whitman, Forbes, and Hurt all need to co-sponsor HR 1565.
Absolutely. And one further comment on Representative Goodlatte. Unfortunately, he is the chair of the House Judiciary Committee, which will be the first committee to be reviewing HR 1565. So Goodlatte needs to hear from every single Virginian.
Before the elections in November, we had the Democratic primary on June the 11th. If you look at the websites and the campaign literature of the candidates in the primary, some of them have very strongly stated views on gun control, and others of them ignore it. So we can choose the people who have the strong statements. I don't know if I'm supposed to say their names or not, but Mr. Northrup, Mr. Herring, Mr. Kent, and Ms. Murphy.
Stand here behind you. Can you use the microphone?
I was just going to say we all need to vote in the primary on June the 11th. And we need to choose candidates who have strong statements on gun control. You will find them on their websites and in their campaign literature.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I have a question. I support all the initiatives that we've discussed so far tonight. Some of you made some comments about some of the riders that go along with the appropriations bills. And while I'm passionate for all the things we've discussed, I'm really passionate about the ones that, for instance, prohibit ATF and the FBI from disclosing gun trace data. I worked in aviation safety for a couple of decades, and I would like people to contemplate where we would be if the FAA and NTSB were prevented from disclosing the aircraft safety statistics. We would not have the aircraft safety program in the world. I'd like to know where we are with some of these other things, rooting these things out, identifying, and then getting a little return.
Well, I mean, the riders that were put on the funding bills kind of were well baked before Newtown even happened for this year. So there was really little to do when the reports started coming out about a month ago. This was already kind of set. So we have the next opportunity to raise a ruckus and put some light on this, which is what these issues need to happen, because they very much go underneath the radar, under all of our noses.
the budget and appropriations process, which sort of move simultaneously to the authorizing bills, the more policy-focused bills. And the appropriations process is actually starting a little late this year, to all of your advantage. You're not behind the curve to weigh in. Frank Wolf is actually chair of the House Commerce, Justice, Science Subcommittee, which oversees all of the judiciary and gun policies, ATF, all of that. The mayors, I think it's on our website, or come find me after, I'll give you my card and I'll get it to you. The mayors put out a letter of support about 2 weeks ago now, just after the Senate vote, for more funding for ATF, more funding for the NICS background check system. We actually recommended funding for 50 new U.S. attorneys who would focus on gun crime reform, in part because we think this would make a big difference. Well, because this would make a big difference, the largest reason. But, there's a lot of opponents of most of the gun reforms who say we just need to enforce our laws on the books. Well, we hope they will join us in getting the resources to do that. We support rolling back what people call the TIART amendments. Actually, we worked with the brand new Obama Department of Justice team. I remember in February of '09, they were fresh in, some of them I'd known in other ways, they were tired, and we went in and said, you've got to put in your budget some reforms. You've got to come up. This was a Democratic House and Senate at that point, so if a Democratic president sent up a package that had some reforms, there would be some effort, we thought, to protect and preserve those, and in fact that was true. So in '09 there was a little bit of a rolling back, a little bit of an expansion of sharing the gun trace data. So when a gun is found at a crime scene, it used to be that law enforcement, police, researchers, mayors could get robust information to track where the gun, for mayors they want to know. It used to be Atlanta, well it still probably is Atlanta, Virginia, a lot of states sending guns north. It's been opened up for law enforcement to get more information than they used to be able to just get this crime gun to this dealer. That's all we can tell you. Now they can at least get a little bit of a sense of what other crime guns are coming to their jurisdiction. So it's a longer story, but we and others worked on it again this year. The administration set up a budget that also rolled back some of the worst provisions. We're working to try to protect those. But I think, I know the congressman staff person is here. I don't want to put you on the spot, but Julia would be a good person to talk to, or if you can relay back that there's interest in reforms of the TIART amendment, and I presume interest in more funding for the ATF Enforcement Division for the entire nation has not grown in 20-25 years, and is equivalent to what the Phoenix Police Department has for the Phoenix and surrounding areas. So, just to give you a sense, it's been deeply underfunded for many years.
Great.
Speaking of Representative Wolf, he's fond of saying that he voted for the Brady amendment way back in 1992 or whatever it was. And yet he maintains a B+ rating from the NRA. He's also fond of blaming gun violence on computer games. So is there anything to that? Computer games.
The main thing on the mayor's team that we talk about is the fact that there are video games available, I imagine, in most parts of the world, and certainly in other English-speaking countries, probably the same games like Australia, England, Japan, presumably, other places. And I believe the latest statistic I saw, now the populations are not equivalent, and I'm aware of that, but the number of murders in all of England, I believe, was 50 the last year that it was tracked, and we had 12,000.
Maybe if we could relay that to the Congress.
So we don't believe that video games are the primary area of concern. We think it's a combination of dangerous people having access to guns and being way too easy between no background checks, places like Virginia where you can go to a gun show or you can buy one in a Safeway parking lot with no background check. And then you've obviously still got the underground market, but if we can at least shrink it to there's an underground market. I'll just say one other thing anecdotally. In New York City, they've seen as they've tightened their laws, the price of handguns on the street has gone up exponentially. And part of the result of that is young criminals, gang members, can't get very good guns, and presumably in some cases can't get guns. I also work on juvenile justice issues. There's been tremendous research in the brain development of young people, and I'm sure some of you either raised or are raising teenagers and don't need a scientist to tell you that teenagers are reckless, they don't think about the future, they do stupid things. In fact, we're all teenagers, so we remember. You add that combination and a gun, and there have been many stories of, the younger gun gang members or criminal elements doing the most crazy things. So if you can price them out of the marketplace, we're also going to be safer due to that.
However, I have a question from a responsible teenager who asks if they're 16, they cannot vote, but what can they do to prevent gun violence? I can say one thing, work on a campaign of someone who would work to prevent gun violence, but do you have any thoughts for this young person?
We would love to have you join us. Where are you so I can look at you? We would love to have you join us on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, which is Monday, January 20th. We have a big lobby day and vigil in Richmond where we recognize all the victims of gun violence in Virginia, and we take you to speak to your legislators. So please join us.
And there's no age limit to sign petitions. There's no age limit, except you have to consult with your parents, please, about visiting members at Capitol Hill. There's no age limit to do what I did in high school, which is start clubs. I won't name how old I was or anything, what year that was, but you can do lots of activism at age 16, 17, 18, and I hope you will.
Twitter also. You can really help by spreading the mayors, Brady, the coalition, everybody has Twitter feeds out there, and if you follow them and then spread that to everybody you know, that would help tremendously, because my generation, we're not so good with Twitter.
The discussion earlier about printers reminded me of something I've been reading recently that was absolutely horrifying about the printing of
3D guns
and
on plastic.
I know very little about that, and I'm wondering what you see, what the impact of that would be on all the legislative members.
I can say something quickly. It's real. 3D printing is real. The plans are real. The latest news article I saw was that, I forget which, I think Homeland Security asked a online site that had 100,000 downloads of their gun plans to stop. There are certainly, like any other field, responsible 3D printer companies and those that, responsible folks who won't sell the plans. You have to have a 3D printer, you have to buy the materials. As I understand it, you typically still have to go buy a piece at a hardware store or other things typically to put the guns together. So it's, we're not going to see them everywhere immediately, but I also understand that some of them are not very detectable by metal detectors. So that's, of course, of concern. There were the Saturday Night Specials and the other small plastic guns that were outlawed for time and in some places. And so I think it is something to be concerned about. I guess to say if you have teenagers in your house who are engineering inclined and they want a 3D printer, please monitor them.
And I will say that locally, we do have some leadership on this issue in the District of Columbia. Tommy Wells has just introduced legislation to ban plastic guns and 3D printing in the district.
3D printers, I think, still cost you about $8,000 to actually buy the printer itself, let alone the material to make the object that you want. So that's good to know. Second of all, the guy in Texas who just test fired the first one, actually, the gun blew up after the second fire. So they still got some ways to go.
Yes, ma'am.
On the concealed carry, I had a bunch of questions with it. The first one, you had mentioned the test, the online test, and I just want to say I didn't even watch the video, and I just figured it did 2 Google searches, and I passed with, I think, 9 out of 11, so you still passed. I just wasn't able to pay the $65 to finish that all off. And then the second thing was, it's easy to fake the IDs, like you said. I have done the Virginia one, the Pennsylvania one, and the West Virginia one, and I'm wanting to drop them off in the offices in DC. And that brings me to my question. It's part of the Manchin-Toomey bill that you can accept a concealed carry license instead of a background check. And I can't get an answer to how that's going to be validated. Because I went to Fairfax County Police and they said they run the license number and they'll see if it's a valid license. But if you go to the firearms dealer, they said they can't run that license number. So
bill is written so that only concealed carry permits that require some sort of review, background check or equivalent, would qualify in lieu of an actual background check. This was part of the compromise, quite honestly, that the members that were working on this made to get, I don't know specifically Senator Toomey, but members to support this, to make some things a little more flexible. The hope is that folks who've had a background check in recent years haven't had a decline in their mental capability or other things. I mean, there are areas of concern, but it's meant to be that there would have been a background check in the recent past rather than immediately at the gun purchase. But, you know, there's, I can understand your concern.
Yeah, okay, well, you're talking about the holders, right? But what if somebody that already is not a valid holder, if you can just print yourself one?
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, you still have the problem of fraud. Absolutely. Yeah.
We'll take one more question, ma'am.
Peter, I was just curious, what, for background with concealed carry, what is the position for Americans Who Are Responsible Solutions? What's their position on concealed carry reciprocity? I believe, as I understand it in the past, yeah, we just had voted in favor of concealed carry reciprocity, so I'm just curious where the law stands.
We don't have a position on concealed carry. Congressman Giffords was a co-sponsor of the bill when she was in the House. So she was never in a place where she could vote for it. I think we should say that a lot of the concealed carry proposals out there, the reciprocity proposals, aren't very thoughtful pieces of legislation. And that's sort of all I'll say about that. I mean, to sort of the gentleman's question from before about how to talk to recalcitrant members of Congress, I think that, you know, there's something in the idea that gun owners are the original American gun safety advocates. Gabby represented Tombstone, Arizona, which was the town Too Tough to Die. It's still there. And it was a place where people loved and appreciated their guns, where guns were a part of the culture. But it was also a place where they had some of our nation's very first gun safety policies. And that is an example. It goes to show that you can have both things. You can allow Americans to exercise their constitutional rights. You can allow them to, you know, like guns, just like people like cars. You can like guns, but you can still, accept some very common sense restrictions on gun ownership. There is something when I go talk to members of Congress and their staff, I always make sure I'm very, very careful to go into the fact that Gabby, Marker, gun owners, that they appreciate gun rights, that they like guns, that they're comfortable in gun culture. Because it's, I lost my train of thought.
I'll say it's disarming.
It's very, that's why I lost my train of thought. I've sort of given up on, I should just totally give up on using gun language. I mean, it sort of permeates how we speak. What we have to do with these members of Congress is wedge the gun lobby on one hand, which advocates, more guns at any cost, which is not what all Americans want, it's not what gun owners want, and the sort of everyday, regular old American gun owner who, 85% of whom polls have shown support background checks. You have 75% of NRA members that say they support background checks. And if you said you were a gun owner, if you're a Republican, go to your member of Congress and say, we accept the Americans' right to own guns. If you own guns, you're not an evil person, you're not a bad person. But we think there are just some very common sense things that we can do to reduce the specter of gun violence in this country. And the analogy with automobiles is very apt because in a year or two, studies have shown that mortality from guns in this country is going to surpass mortality from automobiles. And that's not because there are more gun deaths in this country. It's because the very common sense safety measures that the federal safer, making transportation safer. And, you know, we're much more restricted in our ability to own and operate automobiles than we are our ability to own and operate guns. Nobody's saying we're going to take, you know, cars away from you, right? So if you go with the sort of, I'm a regular voter, I respect the Second Amendment and the gun culture, but I want, you know, sensible measures to protect my family. It's a disarming way to get people to listen to you.
And when you transfer a car anywhere in this country, you have to do some paperwork. For people in DC in particular, historically, it's been a quite time-consuming project. But even in Virginia, you know, you don't have as many options as you do in most parts of this country. We did the analysis, and there's more gun stores in this country than there are post offices. 90% of people live within 10 miles of a licensed firearm dealer. It's not so true in Northern Virginia, but, well, it probably is true. You don't have multiple places, but in many parts of the country, you have even options within those 10 miles. So it's not a burden. It's not a hardship to have to go get a background check. In fact, many gun sellers buy at least some of their guns from licensed gun dealers, and they're already doing it. So we're just saying just always do it. They're doing it in California, they're doing it in New York, and in Massachusetts, in Rhode Island, they're doing background checks all the time. That's what we want here.
We are carving out the reasonable middle ground. I mean, the area that's allowing people to come up and stand up and 6 NRA A-rated senators vote for background checks. I mean, this is the middle ground that I think is going to improve not only gun policy issues, but many issues that we deal with in this country on a regular basis. You know, and it's a ground that you guys have helped create. The more people you get to join with all of us, the more we will succeed. It's just a matter of time before we get this done. Thanks, guys.
And I can't help myself, I have to quote one of the first and most generous donors to Americans for Responsible Solutions is a big gun owner. And there was a wonderful Time magazine article this winter that featured Gabby and Mark, and Mayor Bloomberg was on the cover as well. But they interviewed this guy, big gun owner. Why have you given all this money to Gabby Giffords? And he said, look, I'm not anti-gun, I'm anti-dumbass. That's the bottom line, folks.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you to these great speakers. I think we've got lots of questions. We could be here all night. Hopefully the websites of these organizations, the ones that were on your handout, that'll provide some additional answers for you. I wish I could tell you there was some new, fabulous, sexy idea that was going to, you could walk out of here with tonight, but it's the same ones. It's write, call, email, and I think we've heard a lot, particularly here in Virginia with our elections coming up. Know before you vote, and but I'm going to add to that, know before you donate. Yeah. Know what the position is before you